Welcome to the Cultivating Business Growth podcast, bringing you bi-weekly discussions designed to help you grow your business and create the lifestyle you desire. Elevate your business with proven strategies from virtual CFOs, CPAs, and business advisors. We discuss real-world challenges solved with actionable steps that get you the results you need, both in business and building the life you deserve.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Cultivating Business Growth. Today, we're talking about something almost every business owner wants, but many struggle to actually achieve: higher profitability without working more hours. Because here's the truth: more sales don't always mean more profit. A lot of businesses are busy, growing, and still feeling stretched thin financially. So in this episode, we're breaking down 3 practical ways to improve profitability quickly by focusing on your margins, your efficiency, and your cash flow. If you've ever felt like you're doing everything right, but not seeing it in your numbers, this conversation is for you. And today I am here as well as Katina. Welcome, Katina.
Thank you. Thanks, Jamie. Appreciate it. It was a really interesting conversation that we have ahead of us here. So I'm really excited about talking about this.
It's a question we hear a lot, right? How do we improve profitability? How do we make more money? Or we don't feel like we're making more money, even though things are improving. And so I think this will kind of shed some light on what could be going wrong if you're feeling that.
Yes, exactly. So we thought we would talk a little bit first about why looking at, I've got more sales or I just need more sales, and why that's not always true. Why maybe you have more sales and you're not seeing things go the way that you'd like them to be going, or why you think you maybe just need more sales, but you need to be looking at some other things. So I'll let Jamie, you start, why is that not always true? And we can talk about it a little bit.
So I think one common misconception, right, is sales do not always equal profit. So we tend to forget that while sales tend and can lead to an increase in your bottom line, they don't automatically, and it's not going to be dollar for dollar.
Right.
So I think that's something that people get confused about. More revenue doesn't help if you have weak margins or you don't have money after you put the investing either in the product or the services you're offering. And so if you don't have a lot of margin, more sales, it's just going to be a lot more work and not a lot more money at the bottom line. So there's a lot of businesses that are very busy, but aren't always profitable. And so we see that a lot. And so trying to kind of hone in on what those problem areas, like we're going to do today, is going to be really helpful. Profitability really comes from running smarter, not just selling harder.
Right, for sure. And I think that, I know we've talked a little bit about kind of like financial modeling before, and is your model set up to, drop numbers to the bottom line or not? And this is something especially growing businesses deal with a lot. Your margins tend to shrink a little when you're growing and you're adding people to help and you're doing this and you're doing that and everything. But if your model of revenues to cost of goods to expenses and overhead, isn't true, or it doesn't hold for whatever reason, you can, like you said, see those shrinking profit margins. And so we really need to be looking at the whole picture of everything, making sure that we're keeping our costs efficient and effective, keeping our overhead efficient and effective as we're continuing to scale and grow.
Awesome. So sometimes more sales isn't totally the answer. So we are going to dive into those 3 topics or 3 areas we discussed. We're going to look at margins, we're going to look at efficiency, and we're going to talk about cash flow and how those all 3 can be a way to drive some additional money to the bottom line.
Right. So Jamie, what are the easiest ways to improve margins quickly that we've run into?
Before we dive in there, I just want to define margins. So this is just so that everybody's on the same page. So margins is what you keep after your direct cost. It could be your cost of goods sold is a very common terminology if you're selling products, cost of services, if you're a service-based business, but anything that's directly related to providing that service or that product is what we're looking at. So we're kind of excluding operational things at this point, right? This is the top line gross profit number.
Yeah, this is what does it take for you to sell your service or sell your product, the exact costs related to those inputs
Right.
is what we're looking at here. So not overhead yet. We're just talking about that.
Yeah. And the great thing about this is if you can even improve this just a small amount, that could drop a huge amount to the bottom line. And so that's why it's really important to look at those. I have some clients that don't make enough money there, and that's usually the problem, right? Before we even get to the next grouping of expenses, if you have too much cost, direct costs, it's very hard to run the rest of the business with what's left. And so I definitely see some of our clients struggling there because it is somewhat costly to provide services these days, whether you have, labor that you have to pay for, it's much more expensive than it has been in the past. And so it can be a struggle, and that's where you want to hone in some of your focus. But it is one of the most the quickest ways to move your profitability in that kind of gross profit margin area.
Yeah, to really hone in on that and make sure that you're keeping good margins and knowing what that margin should look like, right? Looking at the industry that you're in, what is a healthy margin, gross margin, I guess we would call it, right? So if you're not familiar with the term, but gross margins is what we're looking at here. So making sure that we're shooting for a healthy gross margin and that we're maintaining that as you mentioned, as costs might increase and those types of things.
Yep. Sorry. So I'm going to dive into the actual question you asked. So how do we improve the margins quickly, right? So one of the areas we definitely recommend is looking at your pricing and review the pricing. Most businesses are underpriced. We tend to not want to increase our fees. We don't want to lose clients. But we really have to make sure that the prices are set so that we can cover our costs and then some. Right? We are a business. We're trying to make money. So we've got to really make sure that our prices are in line with the market, but also going to cover the costs that we have. Another way you can do this.
Costs are rising, like you mentioned, labor costs been a big one, but other costs, software costs, there's costs rising all over the place. We need to make sure our pricing is rising to help cover those and keep that gross margin where it needs to be.
Everybody's raising costs on you. So you have to, whether you like it or not, you have to continue to raise your costs to keep up.
Yep.
Another area you can do is you can work on is reducing those direct costs we talk about. You can renegotiate with vendors. So any of your large expenses, talk to the vendors. Can you get a deal if you pay up front? Can you negotiate a better rate? Sometimes just asking you can get a better rate. Sometimes you can't, but it's worth having those conversations. Shop around, see if there's other vendors you can use, and just tighten your purchasing to make sure that you're getting the best deal you can. And then also shift your focus. If you have different lines of service business or products, what is the more high margin work that you have? Stop doing the low margin work and focus your time on that high margin.
Yeah, make sure you shift those priorities around with regards to those types of things. And like you said, back to the negotiating, I mean, it's amazing what a few questions will get you sometimes in continuing on. You just have to take the time to look at your contracts and to look at your vendors and ask those questions. And it is can be a little time consuming, but it can really save you a lot on the other end if you just take the time to do it.
Yeah. And I feel like this is one of those areas where you just want to spend some time, not just in the business, but on the business, stepping back and taking a look at these things from a higher perspective. And so that can be really beneficial for you.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I wanted to point out to you as we're talking about pricing that there's definitely some common mistakes that business owners make with pricing. So what have you run into?
Yes, we hear a lot of people talk about how they're going to base their price on what people are willing to pay. Sometimes I notice they're based it on fear, right? We don't want to increase it because what if we lose some clients? And I think, we really, as we mentioned, you've got to keep your price in alignment with the market. You need to increase it to, align with your increasing expenses. And so we don't want to be basing it on fear, but I see that a lot. I also see that people don't include their true labor time or cost. They know what some portion costs or their hours of the time they're putting in, but we want to look at it a little bit more, a little differently. We want to look at the value they're getting as well. Especially if you're service based, and then if you are doing more specific work, you got to get all the labor hours in. You want to make sure you're not underestimating that, because then you likely are underestimating your price, and that's causing a strain on your profit as well.
Right. And there can be a lot of ancillary costs to that too. Like you have, maybe the number of hours you're spending and how much you're paying your people, but don't forget, you have your labor burden, you have to get them software, computers, stuff
Right.
to use, et cetera. So there's a lot
Payroll
of things.
taxes add up quick, benefits, all of those things. If you're hiring a $50,000 person, it's really closer to probably $80,000 of expense that you're going to have hit your books. And so you got to make sure you're factoring that all in.
Right.
Because otherwise it's going to be a big impact that you didn't foresee.
Yeah, what your true cost really is. And I think the fear, coming back to the fear thing, I think that a lot of times, at least historically, that when we've worked with people like to work through pricing and things like that, that they find they're pleasantly surprised by how much they can adjust their pricing and not lose a lot of people, not lose a lot of clients or customer base.
Yes.
Obviously there's going to be a point where that makes sense and doesn't make sense market wise, but I would say more often than not, the increase in pricing goes through well. You maybe lose kind of some people that usually were problems anyways, right? Or something like that. People that are not seeing the value in the work or the product that they're getting. So I feel like, definitely, test that out, work through that. Again, if you have a good understanding of your costs or your inputs, right, going into that, then you really kind of understand, okay, this is where I really need to be from a pricing perspective. And that helps you get more comfortable around it as well, I think. But
and I think creating kind of an annual increase mentality, because if you're not increasing it annually, you're probably not increasing it enough. And so then you're missing out, and maybe it's only 2 to 3%, but that starts to compound. If you're only raising your prices every 3 years instead of every year, you're losing out, and that's going to, put a strain on the business.
Yeah, for sure. And the reality is that in the economy that we're in, like there's always cost of living increases every year, right? It's, we're seeing that, and, everybody has to live and have to pay for their groceries and do all their things. So, ultimately you're going to need to be paying people more so they can do that. And, it kind of just trickles into everything. So yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it for sure.
So for margins, we're going to wrap up this section here. Margins are powerful if you fix your pricing first, cut costs second, and stop selling things that don't pay you. You're going to position yourself in a really great place.
That's great. Good summaries for that section there. All right. So we're looking now at strengthening our operational efficiency. So typically with regards to the operational side, where do you typically see the most waste happening?
It's definitely in the manual process and systems. We're talking a lot about AI and how important that is and how great it can solve. I see so many people still using Excel spreadsheets for like basic financial data. I'm like, gosh, AI would be like 4 steps better. But I know people rely on Excel or rely on those manual processes because they're familiar. They know that it's right. They feel comfortable, but it's taking up a lot of their time. So manual invoicing, chasing payments, that's a huge amount of time, and is also hitting you on the cash flow side as well. So that's a big one. Payroll time and tracking issues. So not understanding, all of your time, where that's going. And then another wasteful area we see a lot are business owners doing things they should not, because either they feel like they want to save money and they don't want to spend on that. But typically it's not the best use of their time to be doing certain tasks because they're more administrative or operational in nature. And we really want that owner to be thinking bigger, doing, more sales, having more conversations and doing those types of things than, sitting down and writing checks for an hour, which I've had. I've had surgeons who enter deposits into QuickBooks in the past. And I'm like, pretty sure we can find a better use for your time than entering things into QuickBooks. So we see that a lot. I'm sure you do too, Kadina.
Oh yeah, definitely. And like you said, just a lot of things because, we want everybody in the business to be as much as possible in their highest and best use. So in a lot of times, the business owners, they're probably one of the strongest salespeople in the company. They're strategically looking at the business and trying to make decisions and make things grow and making those types of decisions. And when they're bogged down in doing the things like you mentioned, that they're doing data entry, or they're manually tracking things, or they're whatever the case may be, all the things that they're doing. And sometimes it's just because that's what we've always done, and as we've grown, we haven't done a good job of systematizing those things and getting it in place and having other people do it and having those controls and cross checks in place. So like you said, we know it is right, because if we're in a system and we're maybe not doing it the way that we used to, that we were comfortable with, we need to have it systematized in a way that we know it's comfortable, and we can run a report and we can know as the owner how things are doing without wasting a lot of time getting to that point, because that's just really taking the attention away, right, from the higher best use of what we could be doing as the business owner. Those strategy meetings, talking with our leadership, creatively thinking, like that's the thing we've talked about before here. But the owners, the entrepreneurs, I mean, they got where they got because they're creative people, right? They're creative. They want to run a business. They're passionate, and they need time to be that person and to think about the next best move for the company. So I feel like that definitely can be a bogged down area, and that's, I think, one of the first things to go as you don't have time is that creative thinking. So it's really important to kind of protect that time as well.
Yeah, and I think that's important to mention, because as you're small, it's fine if you're doing something for a little bit here and there and you don't have, staff members to do it. But I think your point is, as you scale and grow, sometimes we add the people, but we don't always shift the workload or all of the necessary work to those people to free up, the business owner.
Yeah, for sure. So, okay, so I kind of went off on a tangent on that side, but let's talk a little bit about some efficiency upgrades that can be made to kind of get in a better position with regards to those things we just were discussing. So.
Yeah. So one of the areas you can improve immediately is by automating invoicing and reminders. We have a lot of clients that have done that, and they see a lot less accounts receivable sitting out there not getting collected. So that helps on both the efficiency front and also the cash flow front, which we're going to talk about here next. But any of that automation is really great. If you can send the bill, it's just easier for people to pay online and get things done, and instead of having to do things in a more manual process. So for sure, automation is the biggest takeaway here. Standardizing some of your workflows with checklists and templates so that people can pick that up and help out with something if they can follow, some steps as far as, just operationally, on the payroll side, on the, any of the sides that you can look to. Having those templates and those checklists can really help make you more efficient. As accountants, we like our checklists. So I do like my checklist to make sure I've done all my things. So it really helps me stay focused and making sure I don't miss things, right, as well. So keeps you efficient and on task. So that's great. Right. Also training and delegating so that you're reducing errors, you're, reducing bottlenecks as well. And I think that's a hard place too, because you have to find the time to train and delegate. Right. But it's really the long term you want to look at. So in the short term, it's going to take you a little bit more time, but then that task hopefully is off your plate altogether. So something to definitely consider. And then tracking time and your labor to see where are the expensive problems? Like, where is someone spending a whole lot of time? And maybe there's a way we can automate that process or make it more simple. And so somebody isn't, spending 6 hours creating a commission calculation because they've got to go to 19 places. And like, how can we make that process better for them, more streamlined, more simple? Sometimes we hurt ourselves by making things overly complex that maybe if we step back, we can save ourselves some time, still get to a good end result, but being more efficient.
Yeah. And like you said, we talk checklist templates. Really it's the systemization, that we're talking about, systemizing all those processes. And but documenting that system too, right? So, if you're taking the time to train and delegate, we've mentioned before, but, make recordings of that training so that, you're able to cross train other people, or if that person leaves the company for some reason and is replaced, you don't have to spend your time again necessarily training them on everything. They would maybe be able to watch the recordings, and then you can help and answer questions, but you're not, again, recreating the wheel every time. And if you have those checklists, those templates, and those processes documented, they have something to follow, and you're not like starting over at the beginning every time. So just, that whole thing can add up to lots of time, lots of inefficiencies, and like you said, looking at identifying those expensive problems, because I think everyone has a tendency to just keep doing whatever is working, whatever they think has been working, because they've always done it that way, and it's still
And it's
working.
easier in the moment, right?
Yes.
Easier to just do this. Yeah.
So, but standing back and being like, okay, it works, but is it the best way for us to do it? Is it the most efficient? Is there something else, like you said, we can automate about this process to make it less expensive? One of the largest expenses obviously is your labor cost expenses, right? So if you're making that the most efficient, you're going to be saving a lot of money and effort and be able to produce much more at the higher end, or the top end, on the revenue lines, for less cost and time. So
yeah. And I feel like sometimes our staff gets worried about that. Like, why are you trying to be more efficient and changing my process? And it's usually not because we don't need or want those people. It's usually because there's more important things they can be working on and focusing their time on, instead of, being kind of just drowning in so many things to do. They're just trying to get done, instead of really being able to focus on the areas that are their areas of expertise, where they can put the most value, as you talked about as well. So I think that's important. All right. So your quickest efficiency win, after talking a little bit more about that: cut the manual stuff, automate payments, tighten workflows, and track time, so you can eliminate those profit drains.
Right. Okay. So on to discussing managing cash flow proactively. We want to be proactive about lots of things in our business as much as possible, especially managing our cash flow. So what are some of the top cash flow quick wins we can look at?
Yeah. So profit and cash are different. And we get this is confusing for a lot of people, because they think, I'm profitable, so why is there not as much cash in the bank? But there's a lot of different things that hit cash that don't necessarily hit your expenses on a profit and loss statement. And so that's where you have to be careful. That's not the same. So when you look at your P&L and then you look at your bank and you're like, hey, why isn't there as much money as my profit and loss? You have loan payments that have to come out. You may be drawing money for distributions. That has to be incorporated in your cash flow analysis as well. So you can show that profit, but still run out of cash. So just because you're profitable, you need to still be looking at your cash separately. And a lot of times your cash flow issues are not necessarily sales issues, but more timing issues. So you really have to understand what the flow is of the cash coming in and the cash going out. We talk a lot about different ways to manage that, but those are the things you need to really stay close to. So we talk a lot about doing a projection. So we do a budget and we do a cash flow projection, and those are two different things. And it's very helpful to look at both of those, because you can, as I mentioned, run out of cash, even though it looks like you're profitable. If you're not collecting money timely, then there's no cash to pay the bills and pay payroll. So cash is it's really difficult for a lot of small businesses to manage, because it's just a different beast, but it's somewhere you definitely want to be spending some time focusing on.
Yeah, for sure. That's the lifeblood of the business. And it's also a very high stressor for people. If your cash is low, can be very stressful. You want to make payroll, you want to do all the things. So understanding that and putting time into that, well worth it for sure. All right. Well, that being said, what are some top cash flow quick wins that we can implement to help us with that?
So one of those being invoicing faster and more consistently. If you're not doing that, depending if you're automating it, hopefully it is a little bit more automated. But if you're doing it manually, you want to do it faster, more timely. The faster people can get those invoices, the more likely you can collect the payment. Making sure you're sending reminders. Sometimes people don't pay. We get nervous we don't want to ask, but sometimes they just need a reminder that they owe money, and then they'll send the payment in. So half the battle is just a reminder, asking for that money again, and then they'll get you the payment. Also, maybe required deposits or upfront payments, either in full or partial, so that you have some money, and they're truly invested in what you're doing, and that way you're not following up with somebody who didn't find value in it, and now you have more work on your hands because you've got to gather the payment.
Yeah.
Making it easy to pay too. So as we talked about, using an automated system so people can go on, throw their credit card in there, get things paid, maybe put their banking information in if it's an automated monthly fee, can really help. And then cut expenses that aren't directly supporting growth and profit. Those aren't going to solve all the problems, but if there are expenses you're paying for that you really don't need or aren't really beneficial for the business, take a look at those and get those cut so that you can kind of have that cash flow freed up for the things you do need.
All right. Oh, the other thing on cutting expenses that you mentioned, I know we also talked about the budget, right? The budget and the cash flow projections. So one of the great things about doing a budget and monitoring a budget is to really hone in on each of those expense categories and what are we paying and why, and does it make sense, and those types of things. Because I think, sometimes things made sense at the time when you started them, but maybe they don't make sense anymore, but nobody's ever really, keeping an eye on it, set up, we love our subscriptions, right? So things are set up on a subscription and they just keep happening. And somebody goes, wait, why are we paying for this? We don't use that anymore. So watching those types of things can really be helpful. So it's just a good process to go through to help with that cut expenses.
And that's one thing I do with some of my clients as well, is we'll just open up things and look at those expenses. We'll open the credit card bill. I'm like, here are the things you have. And I know the first few times we did this, one person's like, I thought I canceled that. I thought this was canceled. I don't want this. Right. So just looking at that, asking questions about it, it can really help, pare down to what you really need and use. And obviously don't get rid of those things, but it's helpful. Yeah. But as you were talking about, if you want to avoid cash flow shortages, there's a few things we recommend. Forecasting your cash out for at least 3 to 6 months, typically the whole year, is what I'm doing with my clients, because they want to see what's going to happen, and we can plop different things in different months and see what's going to happen. I have somebody who's going to be going on maternity leave as a dentist, and how is that going to impact? She's still going to have her hygiene, but she's not going to be bringing in money. So we've got the whole year, laid out, and we can make adjustments to say, well, we're going to only get half as much, production or revenue in that month. So what's that going to do to cash flow? And what other changes then have to happen to make sure we're still in a good place? So forecasting is really helpful. It's, again, being more proactive and strategic, because it makes you really have to start to think about how you're going to handle those things instead of just being in a spot where you're in panic mode and you don't know what you're going to do and you have no cash and you're stressing out. It allows you to get a line of credit in times when things are okay. We highly recommend making sure all businesses get a line of credit, so that way when they do have a cash flow crunch, they have some money to go grab, and hopefully it's just a timing difference. If you're cash flow negative month after month after month, you really need to look at that, because that's not going to change unless you make changes to it. So you definitely, having that projection can really help you think about what you're spending, why you're spending it, and are we cash flow positive most months? Because if you're not, you're going to be losing money, and we don't want that for you. And you have to make some changes, because that won't be sustainable long run.
Yeah. Yep. And, like we said before, sometimes that can be difficult decisions, but, and then for the long-term sustainability of the business and, to keep everyone employed, sometimes cuts have to be made, or whatever the case may be. Otherwise, you're just not going to have a business, and you're not going to be able to employ anybody, for example, something that needs to be done. Yeah. And sometimes just tightening the belt and getting through a hard pinch point if something's going on, that, you can make those choices, and the projections help you to decide, what is the best approach to handle those and to get through it as a business. So, for sure.
So cash flow is the oxygen of your business. Without it, nothing else really matters. So definitely, if you're going to spend time on one of these areas, cash flow may be it.
Yes, I would definitely say if you have to pick, start with that one, because I think that's going to
Yeah. And
definitely
we help a
open your
lot of
eyes.
businesses look at that too. It's important. We kind of, force the hand because even companies that are doing great now, you just don't know when that may flip. So you don't want to find out about it last minute. You want to know in advance so you can make some adjustments. So it's
Yeah,
definitely
and
very
actually, it
important.
makes me think we recently added on our cash flow package to our website too. So if you're interested and you want to start
Yes.
looking at cash flow, that'd be a great place to go. Go to our website and fill out the information. And you'll get our cash flow bundle. It comes with a template and a video of instructions and a checklist of items to look through. So it's a great place to kind of get started with that as well. So.
Yep. Love it. All right. So we're wrapping up. Katina, if someone listens to this and wants to take some action this week, what is the first step?
The first step is to take a step, right?
Do something.
Do
Always like
something.
take
Yes.
and action. It doesn't have to be big.
Right. Yep, definitely. So just pick an area that you can focus on for 30 days. Look at your either maybe your margins, your operational efficiency, or your cash flow. Like we said, it's a good place to start. But pick something that you can start working on and make a commitment to working on that for the next 30 days, so that you're just gaining a better understanding, seeing where things are at. Again, just will help you really understand your business a lot more and what's going on with it. So that would be a great first step to take. And, as we like to talk about a lot in our episodes, just don't get overwhelmed. Just take one simple thing at a time, measure the impact, one thing at a time, and then you'll continue to build up into having more of these things that you can be looking at. Though, again, it's, profitability, especially in businesses that are in a growth phase, it's usually not just one major thing that you're going to find. It's these little things through consistent small decisions that make the biggest difference. So.
Excellent. And just to pull that all together, you don't need to work harder. You just need the business to work smarter. And so putting together some action step on one of the things we talked about today is a great place to start. It can be a small step. Every little step in the right direction will, bring you closer to that success and profitability you're looking for. So any final thoughts, Katina, before we wrap?
Nope, I think that's a good wrap to it. So just take that next step and keep pushing forward.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for joining us today, and keep that momentum going. We'll see you next time.